different approaches to interoperability, I think, first is to understand that interoperability is not a technical problem. Technical solutions can be a barrier, making it harder to get to interoperability, but they are not, having a technical solution does not provide interoperability. It's much more an issue around the rules and the regulations. But again, bad technology choices can make it more difficult to provide that higher end interoperability that I was talking about. And so, I mean, open standards are definitely a good thing because that allows for more collaboration and building of networks on top of networks. At a certain point, if you don't have open standards, your network will kind of stop. There's a limit to how big a closed, how big a non-open system can become. Whereas if you're building everything on open standards, then networks can interoperate with each other, and then we can actually grow this to be something global. And so that's why I would always veer towards open standards from a technical perspective. And the same holds true for rules as well. If one country is using completely different rules than another country, especially when we're talking about real-time payments, then it's going to be more difficult for those two countries to provide cross-border transactions between their citizens. And so even within rules, it would be better if there was more collaboration around common standards of how rules are implemented. We're probably going to have both country plays and regional plays that are successful in the future. And I think that's going to depend more on politics than anything else. It's also going to depend on the size of the countries within that regional play. So there are going to be some countries who are going to be big enough to support their own national interoperability infrastructure. And they're not going to want to necessarily share that with others. However, then there's going to be some countries that just are not big enough. And so they are going to band together initially for a regional play. However, if those regional payment systems are able to offer a better service at a lower price, then and still offer the regulators the same access to information that they're able to get through their domestic systems, then hopefully that will lead to kind of like you mentioned, a merger of what is the most effective and efficient system for that country. And whether it's, again, piggybacking off of a very good regional system or deciding that domestic transfers still need to be managed by our domestic scheme, but our domestic scheme is going to be interoperable at a regional level. Where I think most of the regional real-time payment efforts should go, but not, I could be very wrong on this, is focused on cross-network clearing and settlement between domestic switches, and so, or between domestic schemes. And so how we look at so that each country doesn't need to develop a bilateral arrangement with every other country. There should be multilateral clearing and settlement between domestic real-time payment systems. And that could happen at a regional level, or it could happen at a global level with something like BIS. So one example to look at is what BIS-IH is doing with Project Nexus as a multilateral settlement between a clearing and settlement between domestic real-time payment hubs. And that would be something as a utility. You can also look at what some of the bigger players, like looking at what MasterCard is doing of trying to become and develop that kind of cross-network link, multilateral cross-network link between the the real-time payment systems that they're running in domestically. So my hope is that we get to a point where there are probably regional hubs that are connecting their domestic systems, and all of those are connected into some type of a global hub for real-time payments, hopefully run by somebody like BIS as a utility, not as a for-profit. The Mojaloop is just an open source technology. And so the direction that Mojaloop goes is going to be largely up to the community that's using Mojaloop. And I can have opinions about that as a member of the community, but it's not up to me to drive the direction of it because it's just an open source community. However, one of the ways I think that we could think about when we look at what are the success stories around Asia and Africa that we think are good examples for us to replicate. I mean, one of the ones that we very often look at is what NPCI has done with UPI in India. And I think that's a good metric for showing the direction that I think that Mojaloop would be interested to follow. And you can see that with some of the work that's being done with third-party payment initiation as well. So I think from a product perspective, that's an area where I think Mojaloop thinks that there's going to be Mojaloop is driving towards as a community where we think real-time payments is going to go with open banking and third-party payment initiation and account information lookup services at the network level, not at the individual financial institution level. And then to make sure that with the idea that when you have more and more financial institutions connected into a domestic real-time payment network, it's going to be very difficult for all of them to offer a payment experience. And that's why having large fintechs like GPay, but even domestic fintechs being able to offer at the network level payment initiation to give that payment experience to any financial institution in the network. So I think that's a direction that we're, from a product side, I think we're really pushing for. From the perspective of how we get there, I think the jury is still out of where Mojaloop's going to be the most effective in the short term and medium term in terms of driving financial inclusion and driving interoperability. On the one hand, there are a lot of countries are now adopting real-time payment networks, but struggling with making sure that all of the financial institutions can connect to them. When we're talking about that level of interoperability at the financial institution level, it's great if you introduce a national switch, but and you have rules that say anybody can join, but if the cost of a small financial institution joining your national system is onerous, I mean, some of them it takes up to a year of working with lawyers to go through all the documentation to actually join, and that's not even to mention the liquidity requirements, or not even to mention the technology requirements. Then you're going to have a lot of financial institutions left out, and that's what we're seeing now. So I think one way we'll be driving towards our mission over the next couple of years is going to be looking at the countries that have already introduced or are currently introducing real-time payment systems on over-the-counter technologies, to see if there's other financial institutions that are not going to be included in those. And I think we're going to have a big focus on that, because that's going to be a big component of improving interoperability. There are going to be definitely some national domestic switches and hubs that we're going to be looking at building. I think there's a few currently looking at it across Africa that we'd love to see experiment with Mojaloop and hopefully adopt Mojaloop at a national level. And again, that goes back to if multiple countries are using the same standards, it will be much easier for those regional hubs to then interoperate with each other. So we hope that more countries start adopting this as an open standard, and building their capacity of their domestic fintechs to use the system. Lastly, I think there is definitely a place for the regional and even commercial systems to be using Mojaloop, who have the ability to actually connect with those domestic hubs. And so I think that we'll also start seeing more commercial entities start using Mojaloop at a regional level. Now that the technology is becoming more robust, and the commercial entities are starting to realize that, commercial operators are starting to realize that they can get a better and constantly improving technology at a much lower price than building it themselves or by buying an off-the-shelf solution. So I can't tell you which of those three is going to be the one that wins. I think that the subnational solutions in Asia are going to be much more prevalent over the next few years. And I think that the national solutions in Africa are probably going to be more prevalent over the next couple of years. But with the hope that those regional solutions will start looking at it as a solution sometime next year. So Modus Box aims to be for Mojaloop what Red Hat is for Linux. Modus Box provides implementation services to hub operators that would like to use Mojaloop and implement a Mojaloop for their hub solution. Modus Box also provides software support for hub operators so that they can get the same kind of software support that they would expect to get from a proprietary solution. As part of that, we're also very involved in all the different councils of the Mojaloop community to help drive the direction of the product. The reason for that being, we're the ones that are actually trying to, and there are several others as well, but Modus Box is out there in the market, selling to hub operators, talking to hub operators, understanding what their needs are. And so we bring what we hear from the market, from the hub operators, back to the community and kind of try to drive that the direction of what we're hearing from the market. And I think that's why I spoke about PISP and third-party payment initiation. We're hearing much more interest in that in the past few years, particularly since UPI's growth has been so astronomical.